Well, good morning and welcome to Consider This program. I'm your host, Joe Clark.
And I'm Angie Kinzer.
We are happy to have you along. Hey, if you are listening to this on Saturday morning, you already know the outcome of the debates and all of the fallout that's come from it. If you're watching us live tonight, well, the debates are coming. And between now and then, I would strongly recommend, after the show's over, of course, if you have Netflix or the ability to get to it, that you would watch Social Dilemma. I think that would be a very interesting thing to watch pre-debate. And if you miss it before the debate, certainly watch it after. Again, that's called Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix. Gets a 3-star rating. One of my friends, who I just spent an hour with, is actually in the show. Very, very interesting hearing his take on, how you edit part of somebody's conversation and go in there. Angie, we have a lot to talk to about tonight.
Yes.
What do you want to start us off with?
Well, I'm going to tell you what some of the biggest mistakes in history are.
Financial mistakes or biggest mistakes?
Just biggest mistakes in general.
Faux pas.
There's an actual list. So, number one on that list, you know the books Harry Potter?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you know J.K. Rowling. 12 publishing houses rejected J.K. Rowling's manuscript before it got picked up, which now it's been translated into 60 languages and made over $1 billion.
That would qualify as a financial oopsie.
Okay, so James Howells, he bought 7,500 Bitcoins in 2009, and we've talked about Bitcoins before.
Cryptocurrency.
The value is next to nothing. So he, once he found out it was worth nothing, he left his hard drive tucked away in a drawer for years, and he threw it away without even thinking. Well, in 2013, he found out that they were worth $4.5 million, the amount that he had.
Yep.
So he made a trip to his local landfill where he dug through 5 foot of rubbish to try to find it.
Did he?
He did not.
Yeah.
Oh.
Here's the thing with Bitcoin. It's nobody knows who owns it. Nobody knows who's acting. And that's true of all the cryptocurrencies right now. So it's kind of an interesting world. Ouch.
I know. Well, one more. There was, in 2005, a Japanese trader cost his company $190 million because he did a fat finger trade.
And that happens. It's happened in London. It's happened in New York City. 190 million is a lot.
So he meant to sell one share for 610 yen, but he accidentally sold 610,000 shares for 1 yen.
For 1 yen.
And then it said that the Japanese Tokyo Stock Exchange refused to comply when they tried to call it back, and they were forced to rebuy all of those shares.
We have a lot for you. Hopefully they won't be faux pas. Remember, we help reduce financial regrets. That is going to be our objective tonight. Lots of things to be able to go over with, but part of this is going to go over mistakes that people make. Hey, don't forget to give Angie a call, 800-928-4001. Get your question on air and get signed up for a Next Steps meeting. We'll take a break and be right back. Hey, welcome all of you that are streaming with us. Happy to have you along. Don't forget to send in your questions. I believe we've got Grant along with us tonight to answer your questions. or to at least post them for us. So if you've got something you want to put out there on social media, Grant was one of my students at Purdue almost a decade ago. Tons of experience, and it's just been fun watching him grow inside of this industry. We had a major estate case situation that we were working on earlier today, along with Brett Spangler, one of the CPAs that's on our team. And it's just fun to watch the interchange of ideas and questions. So, Grant, glad you're with us tonight. You folks that are paying attention, do not forget to send in your questions or call Angie at 800-928-4001. That won't work for tonight, but it certainly will work for other questions. So what's our first topic, Angie?
We're going to talk about Roth 401k to IRA and how Forbes got it wrong.
Gotcha. All right, Casey. Well, good morning and welcome back to Consider This Program. I am your host, Joe Clark.
And I'm Angie Kinzer.
Happy to have you along. Hey, there is one of those things that I'm notorious for saying that some people even complain about. They tell me if you say it enough that somebody wants to punch you in the face that you've maybe said it enough.
Okay.
But I don't think that will ever happen. Data on Google, or Google I should say, is data sensitive, meaning the more that somebody's written about it, the more you're going to see that topic. And then you've got date-sensitive stuff where you want to find the most recent information. Internet right now is not really wired to do that. And I think people learn that, but there's places you go. There's sources you go. I spent part of my high school years, Angie, growing up a debate. I was in Muncie, Indiana. I spent 40 hours a week at Bracken Library, going through microfiche and news magazines. And there's magazines that were considered very, very credible. One of those, and I don't want to pick on Forbes, but one of those would be Forbes. If Forbes writes something in a business article, you would think they got it right. And they really got it wrong. It's clearly written by a journalist. And so when I contribute, whether it be the Wall Street Journal or one of Bob Powell's things, doesn't matter what it is, it's deemed unethical for me to get to review after they interviewed me what they wrote before it airs. Because then I can kind of put my own little tweak to it if I want to, right? So you're not supposed to do that. Well, the problem is then you print an article where there's a mistake. And so I'm part of the Financial Planning Association. I was on their board. And one in the forum we had, a young CFP said, I thought I understood this. Mm-hmm. And, so a few of us went in and said, well, you did understand it. Forbes didn't. Right? So you've got to be careful what you read. And it just goes to whether it's this show or whether it's another show. Listen to what we say. Try to help get things that you want to consider. But please, you need to work with an advisor, that is trained in this stuff, where you can sit down and say, okay, you're the one that told me. I didn't read it out of a newspaper article. I didn't get it off of Google. Right? I didn't read it in a magazine. You told me that I needed to do this so that there's some accountability and process that's going on. Maybe you have some unique situations. Maybe, like in this case, you just got bad information.
So the topic that he was talking about at that meeting was if you had a 401k and you wanted to roll it into a Roth IRA, did you have to have a step in between?
So what the article actually said, and I don't want to confuse anybody, so we're not going to spend a lot of time there. Roth IRAs came into existence January 1st of 1998. In the early 2000s, they finally started Roths being part of 401k plans, but very few people adopted them. There was still a large belief that tax deferral trumped what you would get from tax-free from the Roth scenario. And a lot of miscommunication. There were CPAs back then who would tell you that as long as it didn't matter if you did tax deferral or not, it would all wind up in the mix in the end. And we just totally disagree and prove that every day to people who come in. There is still a lot of value in Roth conversions for a lot of people that are out there. But if all of your money's tied up in a 401k, Angie, you don't necessarily have the ability to do an in-plan Roth conversion. Well, now, if your company plan offers a 401k, you are allowed to do a Roth in-plan conversion, and that is clearly something that you need to think about doing. Our planning team put together a checklist for you. So if you want to know more about doing an in-plan conversion, that means you're doing it with your employer. You've got to have a Roth option there, but you can get a hold of Angie at 800-928-4001. And my planning team will be happy to get you that checklist to be able to answer some of those questions. In this case, The author of the article said if you were going to do a Roth conversion, you had to take the Roth, roll it to an IRA, wait a few days, and then convert it to a Roth, and that way you wouldn't have to pay any taxes on it. Now, first of all, you can now go from a Roth 401k directly to a Roth IRA. You can actually go from a 401k that's tax deferred directly to a Roth IRA if your plan document allows it. That's considered a conversion. So then you're going to pay the taxes on it. Where the author got confused in that middle part was talking about what is a backdoor Roth IRA. And a backdoor Roth IRA allows you to, or it functions under the rules that you can contribute to an IRA that may not be deductible, right?
Because of income limits.
Because of income limits. So there's income limits. There's also limits if you have a plan at work. Like you have a 401k plan at work, Angie, so you're more limited to doing a traditional IRA that's deductible.
Right.
Everybody that has earned income, regardless of age now, is eligible to be able to contribute to a non-deductible IRA, an IRA that's not deductible, right? You then have the ability, and this came out of the 2017 tax code where they made it very, very clear, because we've been doing these since 2007. We've been helping people do the backdoor conversions. 2010, the AGI restriction for a Roth conversion was removed. So for the last 10 years, for certain, we've been doing this and helping people. But in the meantime, you have the ability to put money in that non-deductible IRA, convert it to a Roth IRA, pay no taxes on that. Your one catch, and then I shouldn't say one, there's a bunch, and this is why you see an advisor. Don't just take this show and try to go self-medicate, as I like to say. Make sure that you've thought this part through. But if you have an IRA, an existing IRA, you can get caught in a trap that's called the pro rata rule. Now, you may have a spouse that doesn't have an IRA, and you have an IRA. It allows you to do it for the spouse, even if you can't do it for yourself, without complication of the pro rata rule. But be very careful. And again, I would recommend you work with an advisor on this. It is confusing. And obviously, it's confusing enough that the Forbes journalist had some credentials behind his name. He was just confused, and what happened?
Is a conversion allowed every year, or is it a one-time thing? Or?
Every year. You have the ability to convert money out of an IRA or out of a 401k. If the plan sponsor allows it out of your company plan, you can do a conversion every year if you want to. We're getting ready to send our tax package out, where I'm going to talk about income variability for 2020. A lot of people with the virus had virus impact in the pandemic have income variability, some higher, some lower. And there are things that you probably need to consider in your tax planning strategy that give you opportunities here. Anytime you can, you want to turn lemons into lemonade. And for a lot of people this year, that opportunity exists.
Is there ever a time when a Roth conversion is not a good idea? I mean, in what circumstance would that be?
That's a fair question. I mean, so as a standing rule, a Roth IRA is always better. A Roth is always better for a beneficiary unless they're a charity. Then it's immaterial, right?
Okay.
So if you're going to leave me money behind, I don't care what my tax rate is. If I pay any tax, it's better for me to have a Roth, right? It's not always best for the grantor, the person that's making the gift. If you have no heirs, or if your tax rate's a lot higher than the kids who are going to inherit it, for instance, or if you've got a lot of assets that aren't tax deferred, from a sale of a business or something like that, there are definite reasons where you wouldn't want to do the conversion. I will probably still have some money that is tax deferred going into retirement, because the money I put in my own 401k, I'm forced to, as the employer, to put in that's tax deferred. The majority of the rest of the money that I have in there is Roth. I've chosen to pay the taxes on it along the way to let it grow inside of the Roth.
What is the 5-year rule?
The 5-year rule on a 401k is a very, very important thing to understand. I assume that's what you're talking about in that. Actually, I don't know if that's what you're talking about. We talked about it, I think, the week before or 2 weeks before. When you retire at 55 and you have money in a 401k, if you don't have a lot of earned income and you don't go to work somewhere else, you can get out without the 10% federal penalty, where you can't do that in an IRA. Now, there's a few other 5-year rules that go along with Roth IRAs and things of that nature. So again, it could be something in there in the article wasn't totally clear or absolutely, you know, able to read.
Okay, well, we have a question.
Okay.
Is there a maximum age restriction to convert an IRA to a Roth IRA? And that's from Cindy.
I believe, Cindy, the oldest one I've done so far is 92 years old, and the answer is no. There is no age restriction at all on the conversion, no income restriction, no age restriction. You simply have to have tax-deferred money. So we had a person who was essentially on their deathbed, did pass, but they were still alive. Their tax rate was going to be 0. And so I converted enough out of their IRA into their Roth IRA that they essentially paid only money in the first bracket, the 10% bracket, and their 2 more affluent sons inherited the money already taxed, courtesy of mama.
At what rate do you pay taxes when you're converting to a Roth?
Whatever your marginal rate is. So this is important to understand. When you get your taxes done by your CPA or by somebody else, they're going to take the average rate you pay across the board, and that's called an effective rate. So when we talk about distribution strategies and retirement, I do care about your effective rate. And distribution, remember, your 2 strategies are maintaining and measuring volatility. The second one is what is the tax dollar you pay, what's the tax rate you pay on the average dollar you pull out. So effective rate matters. When you look at your marginal rate, that's the last dollar you earn, what it's going to be taxed at. And when you do a Roth conversion, that's just like throwing income right on top of the rest of the income. And so that marginal rate really does matter. That's where we get into some of the bracket bumping strategies and things like that to make sure that we're maximizing the rate. It's also an important part of this year, again, because of income variability. If your income's down, you may have the ability to take money out at a lower rate than what you've ever been able to take out before. Right?
Now, can you convert a 401k after you've already retired?
Absolutely. You can convert your 401k into an IRA. If the 401k plan allows for it, you can do a Roth conversion in the plan. But you can certainly move the money directly to a Roth 401k, pay the taxes on it. And it's one of those things that you need to consider. But everybody's situation is unique, especially with the Secure Act passed at the end of 20 or at the end of 19, the Tax Act changing and the THCA changing in 17, and then the CARES Act, March 27th of 2020. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of confusion. So please make sure you're working with somebody who understands this. Hey, get signed up for your Next Steps meeting. That's where we sit down and spend 90 minutes with you. Our planning team will give you things you want to consider today, things you want to consider tomorrow, and if we choose to partner together, what FEG will do for you. Give Angie a call at 800-928-4001. We'll be right back. Hey, great question, Cindy. Appreciate it. It is important to understand there are no age restrictions, and paying attention to that every year. One of the things we didn't get the time to say during the show, just because you don't have to take a required minimum distribution this year doesn't mean you shouldn't. Same things for people that are over 59 and a half. There are people who have money that's sitting in IRAs that are not going to take anything out this year, that are going to be at a very, very low bracket, that will wind up being at a higher bracket later, and they really should be considered taking distributions, paying the lower tax rate. None of us want to pay tax dollars, but what we want is our lowest tax journey, the lowest amount of taxes that we can pay over a period of time. What's next?
0 coupon bond versus regular bond.
This ought to be fun.
Yes.
All right, Casey. Well, good morning and welcome back to Consider This Program. I'm your host, Joe Clark.
And I'm Angie Kinzer.
And we live in a world, in case you've all missed it, of incredibly low interest rates.
Yes.
Read an article today that you get into housing. Housing is one of those things I watch a lot because I pay close attention to inflation, which has a lot of similarities with interest rates. A house that cost $100,000 or a payment that would pay for $100,000 of interest a year ago from right now would buy a house that cost $111,000 today.
Oh, wow.
And the only difference is the interest rate. All right, so a phenomenal period of time in terms we lived in. I call it, when I write it in the newspaper article every now and then, the search for income. It's like we've got a better chance of finding Bigfoot, or in the case of my Jeep, the Yeti, as Barb properly named it. But it's a crazy, crazy world we live in. So we get questions about different types of investments. And so this question is about the difference between bonds.
0 coupon bonds versus regular bonds.
Cool.
So, well, basically, just to start out, I mean, what is the difference between a zero coupon bond and just a regular
Okay, so
bond?
first let's just start with a bond. What is a
Okay.
bond? And I wish you all could see this, on the screen. If you're not watching us streaming live on Tuesday nights from 5 to 6 p.m., this is a good reason why. If you're listening to us on our podcast or our radio, I still get it and understand it. But when you think about a bond, think about a teeter-totter. And on one side of the bond, you have the price of the bond. We'll just kind of call it $10,000 because that's the increment most of them are traded in. And on the other side of the bond, you have essentially the yield or what you're able to get off the bond. Now, it's important to understand that bonds do not pay interest. It's critical to understand this. If you think that bonds pay interest, you're never going to understand how bonds really work. Bonds pay a coupon. It's a fixed coupon. That payment doesn't change unless the creditor goes into default along the way. Now, there are things like TIPS that are Treasury inflation protected bonds that are a little bit different. But for the most part, that's how bonds work. You had a value of the bond that you bought, and you know what your coupon rate is along the way. When you think about the teeter-totter, Angie, if interest rates go up, the value of your bond on paper goes down. If interest rates go down, the value of your bond on paper goes up. And so the bond market this year has done a phenomenal job because the interest rates have fallen, meaning existing bonds have really, really done well. But that bond is going to pay you a coupon typically twice a year. It's going to be taxed just like interest, which is why people say that they pay interest. So it's going to be taxed at your marginal rate. Remember that last dollar that you put on there, unless you bought municipal bonds or something of that nature. But that's what a regular bond is. A zero coupon bond, on the other hand,
Okay.
is one where you buy it for less than the present value. So let's say that they're willing to say that you're going to get 5%, effectively 5%, or a $500 coupon on that $10,000 bond. Instead of buying a $10,000 bond, maybe you put in $6,000, and 20 years later it matures, right? And you get your full $10,000 back. You didn't get any income along the way. Now, here's the danger with this, and I'll see people who come in who've been at wirehouses or the corner brokerage shop, and they'll come in and they'll own zeros in a retail brokerage account, and then they've got their IRA over here that's got different investments in it. When you have a zero coupon bond, even though you didn't accept interest this year, you still have implied income. So you still get a 1099 just like you were getting that coupon, and you're paying taxes on money that you really don't have. If you're going to use zeros, an IRA is probably a better way to go if you have that as a ability to get in there and go.
The reason that's so confusing is because you say zero coupon, but we think of coupon as the discount. But this has a zero coupon and you get a discount.
So you're buying it at a discount because it's zero
Yes.
coupon. Just understand, and that's a good point. That you don't know what you don't know,
Right.
and you also don't know what you already knew, right? So I've told you before, my 7 years or the 14 semesters at teaching at Purdue, the best thing I got, and I shared this with some of my friends the other day, other than the 5 or 6 of them that work for us now, the best thing I got out of that was having to start over, right? I don't know what you don't know, but I also don't know what I don't know. And the problem is, as a teacher, I forget that there's things you don't know. The better I learn it, the more I understand it, the more I presume you've got it. So I apologize sometimes when you think I'm going back to the basics, but I think it's so easy to get lost sometimes in the details. Bonds pay coupons. It's the easiest way to understand it.
Now, what is face value and how's that determined?
So go back to the teeter-totter. Face value is what's on the bond. When it matures, that's what you're going to get, right? So typically it's $10,000. It could be more. It's typically a $10,000 bond. And you've got that. And as interest rates go up, on paper, the value of that bond will go down because there's an implied, the best way to think about it, and how I taught it at Purdue, is to think about a bond, the current value being like an appraisal on a house. It wasn't that anybody necessarily bought it at that price. It's just based on the current interest rate environment and what your coupon payment is. This is what the bond's implied value is today. When the bond matures, or as it moves closer to maturing, it'll either go from being at a discount below face value, or from a premium going down toward face value. So today we have an awful lot of existing bonds that are trading at a quote unquote premium because the interest rates have fallen, making the existing value higher. I assure you, when that corporate bond matures or that municipal bond matures, you're going to get back the face value. You're not going to get back any more. So you have to be very careful as you read your statements to understand what you really own.
Now, does a zero coupon bond usually have higher returns than a regular bond?
They can, because you don't necessarily have the cash flow that's out there. But it's one of the things that Adam Harder, our chief investment officer, watches all the time, are credit spreads. And honestly, in the world that we live in today, because interest rates are so low, zeros are almost they're not a discussion that we have a lot anymore. Certainly not anything that we have inside of our office. The world of exchange traded funds, I think, has changed a lot, especially in the fixed income environment, in terms of what people ought to be looking at to get income.
What is the normal yield curve?
The yield curve
Yes.
is all right. So now we're whipping out big terms here.
Yes.
So the yield curve, and this is an important conversation. You may hear it in political conversations, but in theory, if I was going to loan you money for a day, right? I would charge you less interest than the young men that are our producers, right? Because I know you've got cash and I don't know if they do, right? So the credit risk for them is higher than it is for you of me getting my money back. Fair? Right? So I would charge you a lower interest. I would probably have to charge them a higher.
Okay.
Typically, the shorter the term, so I'm going to loan you money for a week, right? Think Wimpy. I'll gladly give you a hamburger money today for a hamburger on Tuesday or whatever it was, right? We're getting
I'll
old.
gladly
Lance.
pay you
Yeah,
Tuesday
for a hamburger today. There you go. Very good, right? So if I was going to loan you money for a week, I would typically charge you a lower interest rate than if I was loaning you money for 20 years.
Right.
Now, people think that's because you had the money for 20 years. Well, that's kind of that. There's the liquidity issue. I don't get my money back for 20 years, so I want more money. But I have more certainty that you're still going to have money in a week, right? If I know what's in your bank account, there's more certainty that you're going to have money in a week than there is in 20 years. So in a normal yield curve, if you think going up from left to right, typically the longer the term, the greater the interest rate you're going to get, or the effective yield you're going to get. That's true of a CD. It's true of a